Greetings and salutations, friends, and welcome back to more Horus Heresy lore breakdown. I've got myself yet another sponsor so that we don't have to interrupt these videos with a mid-vid ad. And today's sponsor is Surfshark, the VPN provider. Down in the description below, you will find a link to their website, where if you enter the promo code ARCH, capital letters, then you will receive 83% off, yes, 83, fairly good deal, and one extra month free as well. As for why you would even want a VPN, well, have you seen the internet as of late? It's no longer the Wild West, is it? Getting tracked online is becoming more and more of an issue. I remember looking up a treadmill online once because I'm becoming a fat little arch, and ever thereafter, for months upon months, I was bombarded with ads for treadmills. Which, I mean, to begin with, I took it with good irony. Wow, the internet thinks I'm fat too. But after a few weeks of that, it starts getting tiresome. And how targeted ads is the mildest form of annoyance you could potentially be exposed to if your internet privacy is breached. Identity theft is becoming a bigger and bigger problem as well, of course. And there's also the entertainment reasons for getting a VPN. You may have seen certain videos on YouTube, for example, being region locked. And that's to say nothing about entertainment providers like Netflix. And with a VPN, you can bypass all of that nonsense with but the click of a button. Especially if you're living in some godforsaken countries like Australia or New Zealand and such on. Ah, you poor bastards. You have my sympathy, you two. I mean, not only do you have to live in Australia, a country where everything's trying to kill you, but you can't even access the internet properly. And one final benefit as well, Surfshark comes with unlimited installs. So if you want it on your PC, your laptop, your phone, etc., go right ahead, you can put it on as many devices as you want. If any of that sounds interesting, I highly do suggest again you go down to the description below and click on the link and check it out. And of course, again, remember the promo code ARCH so that you get that nice big fat discount. Now, without further ado, on with the video. We are now on book 18, Deliverance Lost, written by Gav Thorpe. And in this book, our main characters are going to be the Raven Guard, the Alpha Legion, and of course Corvus Corax. Which, by the by, literally just means common raven. It's a bit on the nose, even by 40k standards, honestly, but it's a cool sounding name, so we shan't argue too much. This is actually a book that I quite like because it gives us a fair bit of action, it gives us a fair bit of intrigue, it gives us a nice glimpse into the Raven Guard, which up until this point we basically haven't heard anything about, and it gives us the Alpha Legion being the Alpha Legion. Again, as I've said so many times, the Alpha Legion can be one of the coolest legions to write a story around if you do them correctly. It's when you turn them into Keikakudori Mary Sues that they get really, really annoying. But here, we actually see a long-term infiltration. We even see some of the drawbacks and potential problems with this kind of long-term infiltration. It's quite interesting. And of course, the elephant in the room, the super gene seed, which, for a moment at least, allows Corax to dream that maybe, just maybe, he could bring his legion up to full strength in time to fight Horus. We will of course be getting deeper into that, and how it might relate to the Primaris special snowflake marines, but our story first starts on Istvan V, where Corax and the remainders of the Raven Guard have fled into the mountains and carried out a 100-day, or 95-day to be precise, campaign of hit and runs, staying just one step in front of their pursuers. But their luck was starting to run out. Cornered by Angron and his blood-maddened victorious World-Eater hordes, it looked like everything was just about over for Corax and what little remained of his legion. That was until Thunderhawks from Captain Bran descended out of nowhere and rescued Corax and the remnants of the Raven Guard. Bran had previously been left back on Deliverance on garrison duties. I believe the story as to how he came to be at Istvan was in the first anthology? Or is it one of the side stories? I don't quite remember. I know I've read it at some point, but I don't know precisely where. Long story short, a buddy of his is a bit of a latent psyker, a precog, and he had seen this whole shit going down in a dream and somehow managed to convince Bran to head out to Istvan and check it out. Just in case. I mean, to be fair, the just in case in this particular instance is the potential annihilation of the entire Raven Guard's Legion. That's the kind of just in case where, yeah, maybe you should actually just check. It seems worth it, you know? And everything considered, yes, it was worth it, since it saw Corax and the remainder of the Raven Guard saved from the very brink of annihilation, much to Angron's chagrin. Though once the Raven Guard had survived, there was barely 3,000 of them left. 3,000 of an initial force of 80,000. Small wonder that Corax was feeling a little bit down in the dumps. And again, as I've said so many times throughout this series, the very idea of Astartes fighting Astartes was completely alien to most of them. And now that Corax had gotten so very close to killing Lorgar and then been hauled away at the last moment by Conrad Curse, who had disturbed him perhaps more than anything else, because, well, Curse kind of does that to people. He's a bit of a freaky lad, isn't he? It has really seriously impacted Corax's psyche, which is quite interesting, because often you think of the Primarchs as these kind of immovable rocks, you know, these superhumans, but this book does a lot to actually humanize Corax, in my opinion. It makes him seem not weak necessarily, but, you know, he has frailty to him. He has fallibility. You know? Which I really, really enjoy. It's much better than, for example, Horus, which kind of comes across as this perfect individual that then just turns hardcore super batshit mega evil practically overnight, it seems like. I mean, Horus at this point is holding his own personal court and just executing people at random. In the next book, which is one of my favorites actually, The Mark of Calth, we hear about Lorgar, for example. Lorgar, the most human of all the Primarchs. Fucking bullshit. Apparently, one of my favorite passages in that book is describing how a comma error in transcribing his great work, The Book of Lorgar, saw a man disemboweled for it. They turned cartoonishly evil rather quickly, didn't they? Which is why it's so nice to see Corax actually being a little bit more human in this book. Plus, it's nice to see the Raven Guard, because we haven't seen much of them either. And immediately we get a taste of their form of warfare. As Commander Bran and his ships leave Istvan, they do so via the only means available to them, basically. Shooting their way out of system was never an option, but luckily the Raven Guard are considerably sneakier than that, and employ a technology known as the reflex shields. This was a technology developed on the planet of Kiavar, specifically for the needs of the Raven Guard. It essentially... how to put this? It takes the void shields of a vessel, which usually function by transferring the energy of an incoming attack and basically shunting it off into the warp, essentially, and instead it takes all of the energy produced by the vessel and shunts that off into the warp instead. And since pretty much all of the available sensorium equipment function by reading those very self-same emissions, when they start disappearing, the ability to actually detect a ship disappear along with them. It also fucks with light in an interesting fashion, which I'm not quite understanding how, but it seems to make the ship shimmer and become literally invisible. I mean, assuming that literally all energy is being shunted off into the warp, then presumably that would also be the case with a light, you know? A light strikes the hull of the vessel and would normally be reflected, therefore allowing it to be visible in the first place, but if the energy is being displaced immediately, then that wouldn't happen. At least I guess that's the theory behind it. Additionally, as an upside, the energy requirements to keep the shield in this state are actually exceptionally low, to the point that it can essentially be used for however goddamn long the Raven Guard want to use it. But it does have its limitations. It is only able to disperse so much energy, and so the ship is, by and large, reduced to half power, whilst it is effective. That's half power, full stop. It's, the reactor on full output is 100%, and then this is 50. So that remaining 50 then has to be divided across all of the ship's various systems. Life support, sensorium, engines, weapons, all of that is cut down to half. Which, as the book puts it, essentially leaves the Raven Guard ships blind, slow, and defenseless. Because they can't just switch the reflector shields over to void shields either. That takes several minutes, and in void fighting, several minutes is an awfully long period of time. Again, in void warfare they utilize lance battery weaponry, which can cross tens of thousands of kilometers in mere moments, and the bombardment cannons, which sends shells flying at hypersonic velocity without all of that nasty little gravity stuff to slow it down. Yeah, it's pretty damn quick, so you don't want to be sitting there for 5-6 minutes without your void shields up. The Raven Guard will have to sneak their way out of the Istvan system and hope to avoid any and all detection, whilst Corax ventures in system first to see if he might be able to discover any remnants of the Imperial Army cohorts that Commander Brian sent out in the direction of Istvan 4 to serve as a distraction, so that he himself might approach Istvan 5 and rescue Corax. It would have been quite the miracle had any of them survived, but it was agreed upon that at the very least a gesture should be made, an attempt should be made to see if anyone could potentially be rescued. And in the meantime, Corax did have a lot to think about. The reorganization of his legion, for example. He took them, what remained of them, a total of 4,000, including Brand's company, which Corax now organized into 3 generalized formations: the Talons, the Hawks, and the Falcons. All of the tactical troops in one, the Assault and Dreadnought heavy support elements in another, and finally what little remained of Bikers and fast attack units in the third. Essentially, he was organizing the entire Legion into rough formations around their specific role, so that he could pick and choose elements of them and form task groups. The Raven Guard Legion no longer having the luxury of having large, pre-organized formations. It would have to adopt on the fly now, and Corax recognized that fact. We also get a further little insight into Corax's personality when he talks about how the Raven Guard used to fight. How he really respected Horus. He didn't necessarily have any great love or bond or friendship with Horus, but he considered him to perhaps be the most accomplished of all of the Emperor's generals, and so he was more than happy to offer the Raven Guard services however he could. He talks about how the Raven Guards were used as common pirates attacking supply lines and not really getting that much in the way of recognition because they were doing stuff behind the scenes, But it had never bothered him. In fact, he was entirely happy and fine with his role because the Emperor himself had told him that he appreciated the Raven Guard. This is really interesting because it speaks to a real lack of not necessarily ego for being a Primarch. Corax has plenty of that, of course, but more of a understanding of his position in things and taking pride in what he does well. It's an interesting contrast to, for example, Petarabo, who pretty much throughout his entire stay in the Loyalist camp smarted at the fact that he wasn't applauded more loudly, and for things that he did not even wish to show anyone. It wasn't so much that the Iron Warriors weren't necessarily in the forefront of things, being visible, but more that Petarabo seemed to almost refuse to, show off, basically. Much is also made of how Corax resembles Curse, but I don't actually know if they do. I mean, their backstories are very similar. Both arrived on pretty shitty worlds, authoritarian regimes, the oppressed and the downtrodden, and so on. But Corax was taken in and taught the things that Conrad was never taught. Though, in fairness, Conrad had his chance as well, but he refused it, in no small part due to the fact that he was probably corrupted from the very get-go. But honestly, beyond the happenstances and the circumstances of their arrivals and futures on the planet upon which they arrived, their personalities are not really all that, well, same. They're actually quite different. Conrad Curse places the entire world on his shoulders, and he's seen the future, he knows the future, he can prevent it, only he can prevent it, while still also despairing that maybe he can't, you know? He places all agency on himself, and basically absolves the entire galaxy of any and all agency, because again, he's seen the future. Corax doesn't do that. Corax simply seems to be doing whatever it is he can do at any point in time. And in fact, it's losing sight of the fact that he is but one man, even if he is but a Primarch, that leads to a bit of the disastrous nonsense that happens further on in the book. They also just behave differently. Conrad Curse, again, when he was doing raids behind enemy lines, terror raids, he wasn't doing that as a part of a necessarily overall strategy of warfare. He was doing that entirely due to his own ideals of warfare, sowing terror behind enemy lines, scaring the enemy into submission. I almost want to do a video comparing the two now, because I think there are actually a lot of very marked differences, and the similarities are honestly quite superficial, but anyways, that might be a topic for another time. We also get a nice little view into Corvus's early life, how he arrived on Deliverance, how he was found inside of a glacier of all things, how he killed a group of guards as one of the first things he did because he didn't like how they treated a young girl, which, I mean, reason as good as any, I suppose, and to be fair, they were rather mean little cocksuckers, so, yeah, fair enough. But we won't go too much into that, because most of it is kind of just fluff, you know, how he raised the rebellion, which is interesting, but more in a potential future lore video sense, really. Now, what is equally interesting about this book is that it gives us yet another look into Alpharius and the Alpha Legion. As mentioned, this book actually does the Alpha Legion correct, which is a bit of a rarity, but it's very nice when it does happen. Alpharius, we learn now, was actually making up a little bit of a bullshit lie in that short story we covered in the Anthology breakdown, where the Alpha Legion took command of a World Eater's battle barge and ensured that it did not cut off the Raven Guard's retreat from Istvan. At that point, they claimed to be operating on the authority of the War Master, but this has been proven to be incorrect, as Alpharius is called in to the carpet to answer for his actions before Horus. Now, this is one of the kind of complaints I do have, because Horus in the first 30 books comes across as this real shining hero, this idealist, honestly, somebody who genuinely appears to wish to build a better Imperium. And these are feelings that are somewhat perverted as he gets turned to chaos. He still genuinely do believe that he is doing this for the betterment of the Imperium, and he knows that, you know, the only good war is the Swift War, and so he hardens his heart to the consequences. Him burning entire worlds, slaughtering allied legionaries, doing all of these horrible things, you could actually argue the morality of these actions, because again, the only good war is a Swift War. However, his personality turns so completely, or maybe he was just really good at pretending previously, but one of the first things that Alpharius notes when he gets called in front of Horus is that Horus is now not the first amongst equals anymore. He is not Alpharius's brother, he is Alpharius's lord, and his obedience is no longer requested, it is expected. Like, that's a rather drastic change. The way he describes him is almost like, the classic brooding evil warlord, the dude who'll snap your neck at the slightest provocation. Which, again, the bad guys turn so quick in this story. I'd like a little bit more build up, a little bit more of a gradual decline into evil, a bit more questioning, a la what we saw with Fulgrim. It was actually quite genius how we saw him descend into madness, you know? Alfarius then explains that this has been a part of his plan all along, Kekakudori, yes indeed, because he has infiltrated the Raven Guard. This piques Horus's interest, of course, and he will eventually order a security scan of the Sons of Horus, I was about to say Lunar Wolves there for a second, to make sure that they haven't been infiltrated, but... well, they have, or at least the World Eaters have. Whether or not Alfarius have risked infiltrating the Sons of Horus, who knows, but we are absolutely aware of an infiltration of the World Eaters. The World Eater captain in the anthology story who had that trusted lieutenant who ended up blowing the back of his head out with a bolt pistol, being a rather nice example of that. And it doesn't surprise me in the slightest that the Alpha Legion would decide to infiltrate their new allies, since later on Alfarius will basically state that, yeah, we know, we're treading on thin ice here. If we piss off any side too much, we're dead. We're very dead. But Alfarius does manage to convince Horus of the value of his plan by telling him that he has received intelligence from sources. Alfarius tries to suggest that he too has powers within the warp because he's aware of Erebus's and the word bearer's actions. Kind of easy to confuse those two. Don't both start with a W after all. Anywho, whilst in reality, of course, his sources are the Cabal, who have informed him that Corax will receive some form of aid from the Emperor, and the Alpha Legion would either like to, destroy this, worst case scenario, or appropriate it, best case scenario. He leaves it a bit vague to Horus, and partially because he doesn't quite know either. This awfully convenient, though. This Cabal knows a lot of things, don't they? They're able to foresee this, but they weren't able to foresee the end of the war, or the Alpha Legion basically betraying them, which is another thing they do in this book as well. But for now, Alfarius is free and clear to continue his objectives. He's already started to break with the Cabal, though, which is interesting, because at the end of Legion, Alfarius and Omegon were kind of just dumbstruck, like, oh my god, this is real? And they've been utterly convinced that this is real. Turning against the Emperor is the only way to protect humanity in the long run. Essentially, the only way to maintain any kind of humanity whatsoever and maintain the galaxy in its entirety is to take this path. Again, like I've questioned the logic behind that for a while. Again, if the Alpha Legion knew this and had just betrayed Horus on the outset, or hell, just informed the Imperium, just, hey, you know what? Istvan's is going to be a bit of a battle. Let it play out, even. Let it play out, and then have the Alpha Legion betray the other legions in orbit, starting blasting them, saving out the Loyalists, and be like, oh my god, we didn't know. Like, that would probably have ended the rebellion right fucking there, but... ugh. Details, I suppose. But, again, if they were so convinced, now... Alfarius is working against the Cabal. He's already the Cabal's like, the thing must be destroyed. You gotta destroy it. It's dangerous. And Alfarius is like, yeah, I think I want this toy for myself. I feel as if the story wants to have its cake and eat it too, you know? It wants the Alpha Legion to be so convinced they're willing to throw in their lot with the traitors and basically destroy the Imperium, yet at the same time, it also wants the Alpha Legion to still be, the duplicitous little shits that they usually are, I suppose. Okay, I guess it does make some degree of sense, but... yeah, it really does annoy me how it's like, oh yeah, they're 100% convinced, except for, they're not, but I'll get over it. Maybe. Actually, just one more note on that topic. Just one more, then I'll move on, okay? Because Alpharius is also talking about how the Cabal said, okay, Horus will win, he needs to win, but he needs to win just, so that he can implode afterwards. Now, that seemed to be implied to be, just the inevitable future in the original Cabal recordings, but Alpharius is now also aware of this. That's partially why he's infiltrated the other legions, just to protect himself and to make sure that, they don't win too much, but Alpharius is also apparently very confident in his ability to take down the traitors from the inside, which, again, for the third time, raised the question, if you were confident in being able to do this, why didn't you just do this to begin with? Okay, now I am done, I promise. So let us instead turn our minds a little bit to the Alpharius, the fake one, presumably fake one at least, that has infiltrated the Raven Guard. Because he's one of the primary characters in the story, and it's really fascinating seeing him infiltrating the Raven Guard, and even getting a bit of Stockholm syndrome, shall we say. The more time he spends alongside the Raven Guard, the more time he starts wondering, is this really the enemy? Are we really supposed to fight the Raven Guard? Are these the bad guys? And when he's eventually forced to fight wordbearers, yeah, that suspicion gets a lot worse. He also is, his infiltration is quite interesting. Now, he's an Alpha Legionnaire, so obviously he's pretty good at this shit. He knows what he's doing, he knows how to blend in, and as the operative himself says, his primary strength here is the ridiculousness of what the Alpha Legion has done. The idea of stealing another Legionnaire's face via facial transplants, eating their flesh to take on their memories, and then also using partially psychic indoctrination via the Librarius to meld the thoughts into your own, to, imitate behavioral patterns and such on. That's some pretty hefty shit. And again, the Space Marines are still digesting the idea of having to fight other Space Marines in the first place. Throwing in the idea of mass infiltration there, yeah, that's not something that genuinely would be that easy to see coming, Now, he does make some mistakes. He shows off some Alpha Legion combat tactics, for example, accidentally so, bringing a little bit of intention to himself. We do get quite a lot of hints that there are other infiltrators as well over the course of the books, some of which are far too goddamn obvious, but we'll get to that a bit later. Corax then manages to escape his pursuers, giving a little bit of a middle finger at the very end, sucking a traitor ship into the warp without its Gellerfields up, alongside his own escaping vessel, which leads to the brief yet also traumatically painful death of every single traitor aboard that vessel. It's a cool little sequence before that as well, where they kind of dramatize the reflex shields by having the enemy hunt them, firing Nova Can shells into the void, random spreads of torpedoes and such on. A little bit of Das Boot depth charges, I guess. I mean, it's something, certainly. The whole reflex shields thing, I get that the energy requirements are very high, but couldn't you potentially use this as an ambush thing as well? Because, after all, once you've got some speed up in space, you're not gonna stop, If you're traveling at, just to take an example, 100 kilometers, you're gonna keep traveling at those 100 kilometers. You will eventually be affected by microgravity and such on, but you can account for most of that. So couldn't you potentially put the engines to as full power as you could, and then get yourself coasting in system, for example, then kill the engines entirely, boost up the sensorium a bit, get a general idea of where the enemy is, and then start bringing those down again. Just enough to keep like a basic target lock, and then build up weapons power, and then poof, appear. Boom! Enemy dies. And then, with it only taking a few minutes before the reflex shield is back on fully operational again, coast on away. This reflex shield thing is actually really goddamn overpowered, isn't it? I'm almost surprised Corax didn't try that, just because he was a bit angry after the whole Istvan thing, obviously. No particular surprise there, but then again, also, he couldn't really risk losing the battle barge in himself at this point in time, could he? So, I guess I understand. Plus, as Corax himself says, patience is most definitively a virtue, especially when severely outnumbered and hunted by a bunch of blood-maddened berserk savages. That is a great deal of truth, the old saying, discretion is the better part of valor. And having successfully made his escape, he now heads to Terra to have an audience with the Emperor. His full reasons for doing so are kind of explained. Oh, we need to warn the Emperor, we need to tell him, which is all smart things, absolutely. But his real agenda seems to be getting the Emperor's approval to basically kamikaze himself against the traitors, making them bleed all the while, so obviously with hit-and-run attacks, but Corax really wants some revenge. And he also kind of understands that after the blow his Legion suffered at Istvan, there isn't really much of a chance of it ever returning to full fighting force, so might as well make the most out of it whilst he's still got them. Upon arriving in the Sol system, the Raven Guard is immediately hailed and approached by the Imperial Fists, who unsurprisingly are a little bit anal about the system's security measures at this point in time. For once, you can hardly blame them, honestly. They board the battle barge and investigate it thoroughly. Not finding anything to object to, they lead them further in system, although they are extremely anal. They're fists, after all, and they hold up Corax for quite some time. Eventually, Corax is forced to use a secret code cipher to get in contact with Dawn personally and finally receive landing permission, whereupon Malkador meets him and tells him that the Emperor is not available. He doesn't tell him why, he simply says that the Emperor is unavailable and contacting him is dangerous at the best of times. This has always intrigued me a little bit, so it's suggested that Dawn doesn't know why either, and Malkador's reasoning is basically, well, the Emperor hasn't told him, and he hasn't told Corax, so it would be impertinent of me to say anything. Alright, that's fair enough. The Emperor is currently busy, of course, dealing with a massive warp breach beneath the Imperial Palace, which, if left unguarded, would see the entirety of the planet sucked into the warp, so, you know. He genuinely is busy, and why doesn't he just say that? I mean, I guess he's worried that Dawn will be like, oh my god, I need to help, and just rushes down there and insists on being included, because I can kind of see that happening, because Dawn is getting a little bit stir-crazy, and he's legionnaires as well, just working upon the defenses, but I mean, it's still the Emperor. I think he'd probably have the authority and the, you know, toughness required to literally just go, no, Dawn, sit. I need you to take care of Horus for me, because I need to deal with this shit, and frankly, I am better suited to dealing with this nonsense than you are. But you are more than able to play with your brothers. Still, you know, it causes a great deal of confusion, of distrust, and honestly, just insecurity. Even Dawn himself, as we will see later on in the Horus Heresy, is starting to get a little bit worried about what's going on, and in a time like this, having your chief general start getting, ideas, thoughts, start speculating as to what's happening, if they really can trust the higher leadership, if there might be some reason to Horus's duplicity, not a great idea. Not a great idea at all. Though, I also have a little break in here, because there's another fanciful little part of Corax's youth that we get to hear about. He's being passed around the various cells in Deliverance. Passed around. That sounds more suggestive than I intended it for it to be. He has a series of teachers. Shit, that's also... No matter what I say here, it's going to sound horrible. So, anywho, The various prisoners aboard Deliverance, which is a massive prison colony that is in orbit around Kievar, has been created by the ruling class of the main planet. The moon is rich in mineral resources, and so they're sending up prisoners there to extract it for them. And not just the prisoners either, but their families, and their families born in prison are also sentenced to basically lifelong periods of servitude there. Not a particularly nice thing, to be sure, absolutely. And Corax is starting to learn this from a series of tutors who are teaching him all of the ways of the world, history, biology, philosophy, and most importantly of all, morality. It's where his moral compass has been created, essentially. These various tutors have had a great deal of influence on him. At one point, for example, one of his tutors' cell is raided. This tutor has a habit of whittling little figurines out of slag and then hiding them beneath the floorboards. Corax is also hiding beneath the floorboard at this point, by the way, and Corax has been careless. He hasn't quite fitted the floorboard in place, and so the guards notice it, and they, investigate, obviously. They find all of the whittled figurines, and they stare directly at Corax, with lamplight and everything, and they don't see him. They don't, and it's not like he was stealthy either, it's not like he was hiding in shadows. They had a lamp pointed straight at him. They simply did not perceive his presence at all. That's not stealth, that's fucking invisibility. Quite goddamn literally. And we will actually be told pretty much flat out that yes, it is literal invisibility at the end of the book as well. Now the guards, they don't want to bother with this. It's whittled figurines. Who the hell cares? It's more paperwork than it's, worth. And so they give him a little bit of a bap across the head and say, don't do that, and have him hand over the chisel he's using to carve out the figurines. Honestly, a relatively reasonable response from the guards. And Corax kind of thinks so too. He's like, it's nice of them not to take your figurines. And the teacher, of course, grumbles like, nice my ass, they gave me a truncheon in the guts before leaving. Remember this, Corax, they're all bastards, all of them. And Corax, really happily just nods along, yeah, they're all bastards, one day we'll make them pay. Which is making me think, just a second ago, this teacher was like, oh no, you shouldn't just kill the guards, that would cause all kinds of problems for us. And at first I thought, he's making the moral argument, and he kind of is, you should be sure before you kill a man. And then he's like, they're all bastards, Corax, kill them all, feast upon their flesh. And Corax is just like, yeah, sure, okay, sensei. It shows how malleable the Primarchs were when they were young. For all of the incredible knowledge that Corax had, his ideas of morality, of the human condition, really was no more well developed than, say, Conrad's. He was just, taught things. If he'd been in the cell of a mass-murdering psychopathic rapist, well, Corax would have been quite the piece of work, let's just put it like that. It's really interesting, though, because some of the Primarchs come across as not having been shaped by their environments almost at all. Like, Petarabo. Petarabo got so annoyed with his captor/adoptive father that he broke out and led a resistance against them. And he wasn't taught that. He wasn't encouraged to do so. It was not part of his formative process. He just decided to do that because he's fucking Petarabo and likes to screw things up, I suppose. Still, it's a really interesting look into Corax's youth, and of course his ability to go literally invisible. Because up until this point there have been some suggestions that Corax is just really, really stealthy, but no, this is clearly some kind of psychic ability that he possesses. Further information about the Primarchs is also given when Corax is led to what appears to be purpose-built Primarch chambers deep beneath Terra within the Imperial Palace. There are 20 such chambers, suggesting that they were built around about the same time that the Primarch project began, probably, or possibly right after maybe the Emperor was like, oh, I kind of missed the bastards, so let me design their houses now. So these chambers have been made specifically for the purpose of housing the Primarchs, and whilst it is not described, I am guessing that a great deal of thought has been put into the design of these chambers, because when Corax arrived, he notes that this is one of the very few places he's ever been in that felt like he truly belonged in that place. And considering he's never been there before, he's never seen this, he's never heard about it, this is, way away from his home on Deliverance, that would suggest that it's been crafted, perhaps is more correct a word, to his preferences, designed specifically to make him feel, well, at home, I suppose, is the simplest way to put it. Corax also talks a little bit about how he would feel if the Crusade had ended, if the war was over, peace, prosperity, and all that nonsense. He wouldn't have any issues with it. He would simply have retired, basically. He wasn't a governor, he was a soldier, but he didn't necessarily value the fighting that much either. He figures he could be plenty happy just whiling away the millennia, compiling a treatise, perhaps, on all of the various lessons he had been learned on Deliverance, which is kind of amusing, really. I mean, he had a lot of tutors, and there are some suggestions that quite a few of them were brilliant men, but in comparison to a Primarch, how many thousands of years would it really take to compile all of that? I don't know about that. I suspect Corax might get bored at some point, but he himself, at least at the moment, doesn't think so, which is interesting. He also puts down a report of his flight across Istvan, how he'd tried to escape early on, but his Thunderhawk had been shot down, bringing him down a few kilometers outside of the main battle area, whereupon he then gathered up the scattered remnants of the Raven Guard and led the retreat into the mountains, not bringing with him apparently pretty much any of the other Legion elements, which is interesting. Then again, the other legions were hardly quite as adept in stealth and subterfuge as the Raven Guard, so they might simply not have been able to escape in the same way that the Raven Guard did. That's entirely possible too. Although I do find it a little bit odd that none of them, absolutely none of them, because they don't mention any other Legionnaires escaping with them. In fact, it seems to suggest quite frequently that none of them got out with the Raven Guard. It's like, really? Might just be an author oversight, I suppose. But Corax compiles this, and he's surprised at how angry he is at writing his, memoir of the engagement. How full of emotion he gets, talking about the betrayal of his brothers, about Conrad Curse, about Lorgard, etc. I suppose it might actually be one of the very first times in Lorgard's entire life where he's actually encountered a situation and an enemy that not only baffles and confuses him, but also on some level actually scares him. Hold on a minute. Did I say Lorgar? Rewinds real quick, and yes, indeed, Lorgar. Scares me how often I misspeak in these videos. It's because it's just a stream of consciousness, so my brain will use one name, and then it'll be like, oh, insert name here, and my brain doesn't even react. I catch it occasionally, but not often enough. Anywho, back to it. Eventually, however, he's summoned to a meeting with Malcador and Dawn, where they decide upon the future. Dawn, of course, wants Corax to bring his legion to Terra because, well, he could certainly use another few thousand warriors to man the walls, but Corax is not particularly interested in that in the slightest. He needs to strike back at the traitors, and he makes an excellent point of it too. The Raven Guard aren't garrison troops, they're not wall defenders, they're hit-and-run guerrilla warfare specialists. They are better spent out there in the galaxy slowing down a Horus's advance, buying extra time for Dawn to perfect the defenses, buying extra time for the White Scars to arrive, the Blood Angels perhaps, maybe even the Ultramarines and so on. And Corax also is basically saying that if he is to be dead, if his legion is to be consigned to history, he wants it to be glorious. He doesn't want some pathetic whimpering out for his remaining legionnaires. If they're going to die, they want to die fighting. And Corax is also doing this in part to, I believe, assuage his own guilt. He feels genuinely guilty, it seems, about not killing Lorgar, about not standing and facing Conrad Curse, because Corax still figures he could probably have taken him, and he could definitely take Lorgar. No issues there. And if he'd stood and fought, okay, maybe he would have been surrounded and cut down by the enemy's legionnaires, possibly. I mean, he can turn fucking invisible, so I don't know about that. See, that's the problem with the ability to turn literally invisible. It's a bit of a plot problem, isn't it? He could have cut down Conrad's, then turned and butchered Lorgar like the simpering whelp he is, and then simply just gone poof and disappeared. That would have deprived the traitors of 2 generals, 2 fairly vital ones as well. I mean, Conrad, okay. 1 general and 1 batshit insane lunatic who was barely in control of his own legion. But still, you know, Conrad was a fighting force in and of himself, I suppose. And the murder of Lorgar? Oof. That certainly would have, I don't necessarily think tipped the scale, because at this point in time, Lorgar was barely in control of his own legion. There were far too many disparate power structures within the Wordbearers at this point, with Colfedon and Erebus practically running their own little mini crusades, though Lorgar would eventually end up dealing with that as well. But, you know, the death of Lorgar, the death of the primary apostle of the ruinous powers, not to mention the fact also that a lot of people within the Wordbearers themselves, the rank and file, you know, they were loyal to Lorgar. A lot of them did this against their best judgment. So, what would happen if Lorgar had actually died? Would they continue on in his memory, or would they find it liberating, throwing off whatever biologically programmed sense of loyalty had been worked into them from their very creation, and rebelling against their current course of action and events? Who knows? It would be a purely theoretical little idea, that, but interesting one, certainly. But enough theoreticals for now. Corax is brought into an audience with Malcador and Dawn, whereupon Dawn requests that Corax join the defenses, which he refuses. He would much rather strike out against the enemy. A little disagreement ensues, and Malcador is possessed by the Emperor's spirit, who then drags Corax into a psychic audience of sorts, I suppose, where Corax may explain that he does not believe that he can rebuild the Legion, and that he cannot spare the troops necessary to do so. He wishes to be allowed to attack the War Master and go out in a burst of glory. The Emperor is understanding of this, of Corax's need to strike back, but he says there is no need to sacrifice the Legion. He is clearly hesitant to do so, but he says that he trusts Corax, and gives him a secret. The very secret the Cabal figured he would be giving him. Gene tech. He gives Corax the memories of the Emperor himself, and the location of a secret laboratory, defended by ingenious means with just about enough hints to let Corax perhaps overcome them. Because the Emperor is far too busy fighting the demonic hordes to wander out there with a key himself. When Corax gets this gene tech, he might just be able to rebuild his Legion Astartes. And we will be talking about that, by the way. That'll be the next episode. A nice long rant on how this may, or probably honestly may not, be related to the Primaris Space Marines. Until next time, I've been Arch. Thank you all very much for listening, and have a good day.